My sister and parents gifted us a luxury crib. Then my husband froze mid-use. The silence in the nursery was a suffocating blanket, heavier than any sound. My husband, Mark, stood frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the polished rail of the crib. His face, usually a canvas of easy smiles and warm reassurance, was a mask of pale, dawning horror. He stared down at the plush, organic mattress, at the space where our newborn son, Leo, should have been sleeping peacefully. But Leo was safe in my arms, his tiny chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was the only steady thing thought in my universe right now. The luxury crib, a grand, imposing piece of furniture that had dominated the room since its arrival, was no longer a symbol of my family's generosity. It was a monument to their betrayal. "Nat, what is this?" Mark's voice was a strained whisper, a frayed rope threatening to snap. He didn't look at me. His eyes were glued to the intricate carvings on the headboard, as if they might offer an explanation for the chill that had just snaked its way into our home, into our new life. I held Leo a little tighter, my own heart a frantic drum against my ribs. "I told you something was wrong with it," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. For weeks, that feeling had been my unwelcome companion, a shadow lurking in the corner of my eye. It was there when my mother, Helen, and my sister, Amanda, presented the crib at my baby shower, their smiles too bright, their insistence too sharp. It was there every time I walked into the nursery and saw it gleaming under the soft light, a gilded cage I refused to put my child in. They called me ungrateful, paranoid, a first-time mother's anxiety running wild. Helen, with her perfectly coiffed hair and iron will, had waved away my concerns with a flick of her wrist. "Natalie, darling, it's the safest model on the market. We spared no expense," Amanda had chimed in, her tone laced with that familiar, patronizing sweetness. "We just want the best for our nephew. Nat, don't be so dramatic." But my instincts, honed by a lifetime of navigating their suffocating brand of love, screamed otherwise. I saw the flicker in Amanda's eyes, the slight, almost imperceptible tightening of my mother's jaw when I thanked them but moved the bassinet we'd actually bought next to my bed. I'd spent my pregnancy dreaming of this room, painting the soft blue walls, carefully selecting every tiny detail. But their gift, meant to be the centerpiece, had poisoned the sanctuary I'd tried to create. It was a Trojan horse, beautiful on the outside, but hiding a danger I couldn't yet name. Mark had tried to be the peacemaker, as always. "Honey, they're just trying to help. It's a beautiful crib." He didn't understand the intricate web of control and manipulation that defined the Brooks women. He didn't see the subtext in every gesture, the history encoded in every seemingly kind word. So I let the crib sit there, a silent testament to a battle I was fighting alone. Until tonight, he'd come home, found me feeding Leo in the rocking chair, and his gaze had fallen on the empty crib once more. The question had been gentle, but the underlying frustration was clear. "Nat, are we ever going to use it? It seems like such a waste." That's when I knew I couldn't protect him from it any longer. My own suspicion wasn't enough. He needed to feel it, to see the truth for himself. My voice was calm, a stark contrast to the tempest inside me. "You're right. Let's try it. You put him in." I held out our son. Mark took him, his movements full of the tender, careful grace of a new father. He walked to the crib, cooing softly to Leo, his back to me. He leaned over, and for a heart-stopping moment, I almost screamed for him to stop. But then he paused. He didn't straighten up, didn't. His shoulders tensed. A stillness fell over him, so absolute it was terrifying. He slowly, carefully, placed Leo back in my waiting arms before turning his full attention back to the crib. Now? He reached inside, his hand tracing the edge of the mattress. Then he lifted it. The plush organic cotton and hypoallergenic filling gave way to a thin, hard sheet of wood, and underneath that, the truth. His breath hitched. The blood drained from his face, leaving him ghostly pale under the soft nursery lights. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and sheer terror. Natalie. He choked out, his voice cracking. Why is there a solid metal plate bolted to the base? And these look like restraints. Beneath the luxury, beneath the layers of feigned affection and concern, lay the secret. It was never meant for safety. It was meant for control. And as I looked at my husband's horrified face, I knew this was only the beginning. My family hadn't just given me a crib. They'd given me a declaration of war. And they had no idea how hard I was willing to fight back. Mark sank onto the soft rug, his back against the wall opposite the cursed crib, his face buried in his hands. The silence he left behind was filled by the ghosts of my past, the echoes of a lifetime spent under my mother's suffocating reign. To understand the crib, you had to understand Helen Brooks. My mother didn't love, she possessed. Her affection was a currency, dispensed only in exchange for absolute compliance. Growing up, our home in the manicured suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, wasn't a haven, it was a showroom. We were her prized exhibits. I was the difficult one, the one with the inconvenient desire for a life of my own. My choice to study art instead of business was a phase. My decision to move into a downtown apartment after college was a reckless whim. But every step I took toward independence was met with a campaign of emotional warfare cloaked in concern. Natalie, we just worry about you. The world is a dangerous place. It's safer here. With family. Safer for whom was the question I always swallowed. Amanda, my younger sister by 2 years, learned the lesson I refused to. She was the mirror, reflecting my mother's every expectation back at her. She pursued a law degree from our mother's alma mater, joined the right social clubs, and dated men Helen pre-approved of. She was the golden child, the testament to our mother's successful parenting. Her loyalty was rewarded with lavish gifts, constant praise, and the coveted position as my mother's chief confidant. Their alliance was a fortress I could never breach. Amanda wasn't just a sister. She was my mother's lieutenant. Her eyes and ears, reporting back on my every perceived failure and misstep. Her sweetness was a weapon. Her concern a smokescreen for the condescending pity she felt for my struggles. When I met Mark, it was the first time I felt like I could truly breathe. He was an architect, a man who built things, who understood solid foundations and clear lines. He was kind, steady, and saw me for who I was, not who my family wanted me to be. He was everything my mother couldn't control. And for that, she hated him. Of course. She never said it. Instead, she wrapped her disdain in compliments that were actually criticisms. Mark is so simple in his tastes. Isn't he? She'd say, smiling thinly. It must be a comfort for you, Natalie, to have someone so uncomplicated. She and Amanda would exchange knowing glances, a silent conversation that declared him unworthy of the Brooks family. They tried to sow seeds of doubt, highlighting his modest upbringing or his preference for a quiet night and over their glitzy charity galas. "Are you sure you're not bored?" Sweetie Amanda would ask, her voice dripping with faux sympathy. But Mark's love was my shield. With him, I felt strong enough to set boundaries. We bought a house on the other side of town. We eloped, a decision that caused a scandal of epic proportions. Helen's reaction was a masterclass in manipulation. There were tears, accusations of cruelty, and then a chilling, calculated withdrawal of affection that was meant to bring me to my knees when that didn't work. She pivoted the moment I announced my pregnancy. The frost thawed, replaced by an unnerving, predatory warmth. The baby, my Leo, was a new frontier for her control. It was a chance for a do-over, a way to imprint herself on my life in a way she no longer could with me. The unsolicited advice began immediately, followed by a deluge of approved items close and muted. Tasteful colors she preferred, books on parenting that emphasized strict scheduling, and finally, the crib. The baby shower was their stage. They unveiled it with a flourish, a gleaming monstrosity of dark wood and ornate carvings that looked more like a tiny throne than a bed. It was completely at odds with the simple, modern nursery I had planned. "It's an heirloom," my mother had announced to the room, though I knew for a fact it was brand new. "A symbol of our family's love and protection for this new life." The message was clear. Our family, our protection. You are merely the vessel. My polite but firm refusal to make it the centerpiece was seen as the ultimate betrayal. Now, in the quiet of the nursery, Mark finally looked up, his eyes cleared of their earlier naivety. He finally saw them, not as overbearing in-laws, but as the antagonists of my life's story. "All this time," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "all those little comments, the suggestions, I thought they were just difficult. But this? Nat, this is sick." He stood up and walked over to me, his gaze falling on Leo, who was sleeping soundly against my shoulder, oblivious to the darkness that had tried to claim his cradle. Mark gently touched his cheek, a fierce, protective light in his eyes I had never seen before. What were they thinking? That we would just lock him in? What is wrong with them? I leaned my head against his shoulder, the weight of years of silent struggle finally being shared. "They weren't thinking about him," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "They were thinking about me." This was never about Leo's safety, it was about controlling mine. It was about ensuring that even in my own home, in the most sacred space of motherhood, I would never be free of them. It was a message, a warning, and a trap, all in one soul, and we had just walked right into it. The next morning, the nursery felt tainted. The soft morning light streaming through the window couldn't wash away the ugly truth that the room now held. Mark and I had barely slept, speaking in hushed, furious tones through the night. The crib stood like a defendant in a trial, its polished wood gleaming with a sinister sheen. Mark, ever the pragmatist, had already taken a toolkit to it. With a few grunts of effort and the screech of protesting metal, he'd unbolted the heavy steel plate from the base. It now lay on the floor, alien and brutal against the plush carpet. The restraints were thick leather straps, cleverly designed to be threaded through discreet slits in the mattress, almost invisible unless you were looking for them. Who even manufactures something like this? The question hung in the air, sickening and unanswerable. "We have to call them," Mark said, his jaw tight. He was wiping his hands on a rag, but it felt like he was trying to wipe away the grime of the discovery itself. "We have to confront them." A cold dread washed over me. Confronting my mother wasn't a conversation, it was a battle. A battle she had never lost. But looking at Mark's resolute face, and then at Leo sleeping peacefully in the bassinet far across the room, I knew he was right. We couldn't let this go. This wasn't about a hurtful comment or an overbearing gesture anymore. This was a calculated act of malice. My hand was trembling as I dialed her number. I put the phone on speaker. A silent agreement that we were in this together. My mother answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and flawless as ever. "Natalie. Darling, I was just thinking about you. How is my precious grandson?" I took a breath, anchoring myself. He's fine. Mom, I'm calling about the crib. A slight pause. Oh, is something wrong with it? I told you. It's the absolute best. We found the metal plate. Mom, I said, my voice colder than I intended. The one bolted to the base, and the leather straps hidden in the mattress. We want to know what they're for. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and charged. I could picture her perfectly standing in her immaculate kitchen, her expression hardening, her mind racing to formulate a counterattack. When she spoke again, her voice was dripping with wounded theatricality. Metal plate straps. Oh, Natalie, my poor, darling girl, what are you talking about? Don't, I snapped, my composure cracking. Don't you dare play dumb. We took it apart. We're looking right at them. Suddenly, Amanda's voice joined the call, saccharine and cloying. Nat, is that you? Mom sounds upset. What's going on, Amanda? You were there when they bought it, Mark interjected, his voice firm. You must have known about this. Known about what Amanda's feigned confusion was a perfect echo of my mother's. We bought you the most expensive, safest crib available. Now you're making these bizarre accusations, Nat. I've been reading about postpartum. It can make you feel paranoid. It can make you see things that aren't there. We're just worried about you. The gaslighting was so immediate, so absolute. It was almost impressive. They were turning my valid, terrifying discovery into a symptom of my own insanity. The conversation devolved from there. A circular nightmare of their feigned concern and my escalating frustration. We ended the call with nothing resolved. Only the chasm between us wider and deeper than ever. Mark and I were left staring at the phone, the air thick with their poison. The real escalation came 2 days later. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Leo was napping, and I was finally enjoying a moment of quiet with a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Standing on my doorstep was a pleasant-looking woman with a kind smile and a lanyard around her neck. Her ID identified her as Martha Dawes from the Department of Child and Family Services. My blood ran cold. Mrs. Brooks, she asked gently. I'm here to follow up on a report we received. May I come in my home? My sanctuary? Was suddenly a crime scene, and I was the prime suspect. Numbly, I let her in. She sat on the couch I'd spent weeks choosing, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking everything in. She explained, in a calm and practiced tone, that they had received an anonymous call from a concerned family member. The caller had reported that I was suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. They claimed I was exhibiting extreme paranoia, that I was having dangerous delusions. And then came the killing blow, the caller mentioned. Miss Dawes said, looking at her notes, that you have a specific fixation on your son's crib, that you believe it's some kind of a trap, and that your erratic behavior is creating an unsafe environment for the infant. The trap they had set wasn't the crib itself. The crib was just the bait. The true trap was this. They had used my instinct, my one act of clear-sighted self-preservation, and twisted it into evidence of my madness. They had weaponized the very system meant to protect my child against me. My mother and sister hadn't just given me a crib. They had filed a formal complaint against my sanity, a calculated, vicious attempt to prove what they'd always believed, that I was unfit, unstable, and that they were the only ones who knew what was best. My home was no longer safe. My motherhood was under official review. And I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Panic is a cold, sharp thing. It clawed its way up my throat as I sat across from Martha Dawes, her pen scratching against her notepad, each stroke a judgment against my fitness as a mother. My own living room felt alien, the air thin. Every word I said felt like a misstep, a confirmation of the lies my mother and sister had spun. I tried to explain, my voice trembling, that the call was a malicious act, a retaliation for confronting them about the crib. So you had a disagreement with your family, and you believe this is their way of getting back at you, Ms. Dawes asked, her tone professionally neutral. Yet I heard the skepticism she was trained to have. Of course, it sounded like a paranoid fantasy. A family so cruel they would report their own daughter and sister to child services. It was the stuff of melodramatic fiction, not a quiet Tuesday in Charlotte. For a terrifying moment, the floor dropped out from under me. What if she didn't believe me? What if they took Leo? The carefully constructed world I had built with Mark, a world away from the toxic swamp of my upbringing, was about to be bulldozed. I could feel the walls of their trap closing in, the one they had been building my whole life. My mother's voice echoed in my head, a litany of my failures. You're too sensitive, Natalie. You overreact. You can't handle pressure. For a split second. A sliver of doubt pierced my own conviction. Was I going crazy? Was this all some horrible, stress-induced hallucination? My breath hitched, and the room began to swim. I was collapsing from the inside out, just as the tears I'd been fighting threatened to spill over. The front door opened. Mark walked in, a grocery bag in each arm, his face breaking into a smile that faltered the moment he saw us. He took in the scene, mitspanding, pale and shaking, the strange woman with the official lanyard, and his expression hardened. He dropped the bags on the floor, the sound of a carton of eggs cracking echoing the fracture in our lives. He was by my side in an instant, his hand a warm, solid presence on my shoulder. What's going on here? He asked, his voice low and protective. Miss Dawes introduced herself, her explanation of the anonymous report hanging in the air like poison gas. I watched Mark's face, saw the flicker of disbelief turn into a slow-burning rage. But instead of exploding, he went still. He looked from Ms. Dawes to me, and in his eyes, I saw not a flicker of doubt. I saw absolute, unwavering belief. That was the anchor I needed. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, clarifying fury. This was their endgame, to isolate me, to make me seem unhinged, to get the authorities to validate their narrative to me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The terror, the hurt, the years of feeling like a victim, it all burned away, leaving behind something hard and sharp, resolve. My mother and sister had miscalculated. They thought they were pushing a fragile, emotional new mother over the edge, like they didn't realize they had just cornered a lioness. I stood up, my movements calm and deliberate. The emotional collapse was over. The transformation was complete. Ms. Dawes, I said, my voice steady now, devoid of the tremor it held just moments before. Would you like to see the evidence? I didn't wait for an answer. I led her into the nursery. Mark followed. A silent, powerful guard at my back. The room was just as we'd left it that morning. The pristine, luxury crib stood in the corner, its mattress leaning against the wall, and on the floor, where the morning light hit it, lay the slab of cold, hard steel and the coiled leather straps. Ms. Dawes stopped dead in the doorway. Her professional neutrality faltered, a flicker of genuine shock crossing her features. She walked slowly into the room, crouching down to look at the metal plate, at the industrial-grade bolts Mark had removed. She touched one of the leather straps. Her brow furrowed in disbelief. This was part of the crib, she asked, looking from the plate to me. It was bolted underneath the mattress support. Mark explained, his voice a low growl. The straps were threaded through the mattress itself, invisible unless you knew they were there. I went to the closet and pulled out my laptop. I opened it to the call logs from 2 days prior, showing the call with my mother and Amanda. Then I showed her the text that followed Amanda's cloying messages asking if I was feeling okay, if I'd talked to a doctor about my anxiety. The anonymous report came this morning, I said, meeting Ms. Dawes' eyes directly. Less than 48 hours after I confronted my mother about this, I gestured to the brutal hardware on my son's nursery floor. The caller, my concerned family member, told you I was having delusions about the crib being a trap. Does this look like a delusion to you? I laid out the entire history, not as a rambling, emotional plea, but as a statement of fact. I spoke of the control, the manipulation, the constant undermining of my independence. I told her about their reaction to my marriage, their attempts to poison my relationship with Mark. I painted a picture of a calculated campaign to declare me an unfit mother so they could swoop in and take control of my son. I was no longer defending myself, I was prosecuting them. Miss Dawes listened, her pen finally still. She looked from the steel plate to my calm face, to Mark's protective stance, and back to the evidence. The official mask was gone, replaced by a look of deep, troubled concern. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was beginning to take root. She was no longer here to evaluate a paranoid mother. She was here because she had stumbled into something far darker, a family drama so toxic it had become a weapon. The power in the room had shifted. My mother's trap had failed to spring. Instead, I had just armed myself with its teeth. The air in our living room was thick with unspoken tension, a tactical stillness before an ambush. 3 days after her initial visit, Martha Dawes sat in an armchair in the corner, a silent observer. Her presence was my idea, a condition for the family meeting I had arranged. My mother and sister were coming over, summoned under the pretense of clearing the air. They believed they were walking in for the final act of my surrender, ready to graciously accept my apology and reassert their control over my fragile state. They had no idea they were walking into a tribunal. The doorbell rang, and my heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Mark squeezed my hand, a silent transfer of strength. Before he went to open it, Helen and Amanda swept in, their faces composed in masks of gentle, sorrowful concern. They'd even brought a peace offering, an absurdly large bouquet of white lilies, funereal and cloying. "Natalie, darling," Helen began, her voice a soft coo as she rushed toward me, arms outstretched for an embrace. I stood my ground, not moving an inch, and her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. The first crack in her composure. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice cool and even. "Please, sit down." They settled on the couch, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of disarray, any evidence to support their story. Amanda placed the lilies on the coffee table, a passive-aggressive centerpiece. "Nat, we were so worried," she said, her brow furrowed in a perfect imitation of sincerity. "That phone call, you just didn't sound like yourself. Thus, we're not angry, we just want to help you get through this." This was it, the performance I had been anticipating my entire life. I let her words hang in the air, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then, I looked directly at my mother. "I know about the anonymous call to child services." "Mom," Helen flinched, a barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, recovering quickly. "Why would anyone do such a thing?" "An anonymous family member," I clarified, my gaze unwavering. My gaze? "Someone who claimed I was delusional." "Specifically, delusional about the crib you gave me." Amanda jumped in, her voice pitched with alarm. "Someone called child services on you. Oh, Natalie, that's horrible. See, Mom, this is what we were worried about. Your paranoia is attracting the wrong kind of attention." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They were doubling down, using the consequences of their own actions as further proof of my instability. "Let's talk about the crib," I said, cutting through her feigned panic. I nodded to Mark. He disappeared into the nursery and returned a moment later, with a resonant thud that made both women jump. He placed the heavy steel plate on the coffee table, right next to their funereal lilies. Then, he uncoiled the leather straps, letting them fall across the metal. The color drained from Helen's face. Amanda stared at the objects as if they were venomous snakes, her mouth opening and closing silently. The air of condescending pity vanished, replaced by raw, cornered panic. "We know what this is," Mark said, his voice dangerously low. "The question is, why did you put it there?" Helen sputtered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. It's a mistake. The manufacturer, they must have sent the wrong one. A defective model? We had no idea, I swear." "A defect?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "A defect that includes custom-made leather restraints hidden inside the mattress? A defect that just happens to align perfectly with your lifelong belief that I am incapable and need to be controlled?" "This is insane." Amanda finally found her voice, shrill and desperate. "You're twisting this so we tried to do something nice, and you're turning us into monsters." "You turned yourselves into monsters when you filed a report against my sanity," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "When you tried to use the state to take my child. And that was the cue." From the corner of the room, Martha Dawes cleared her throat. She stood up, her official lanyard suddenly seeming like a judge's gavel. "Actually," she said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the chaos, "I've been looking into the manufacturer error theory." Helen and Amanda froze, spinning around to stare at the social worker as if she were an apparition. Pure, unadulterated terror dawned on their faces. Ms. Dawes continued, consulting her notepad. "The crib is from a small, boutique company in Europe that specializes in custom orders. I spoke with the owner this morning. He was very helpful. He confirmed that this model was a specific, one-time commission. It was described as a crib with enhanced security features for a particularly challenging infant. The order was placed and paid for by one Helen Brooks." She looked up, her gaze pinning my mother to the spot. "He said you were very specific about the weight of the plate and the design of the restraints?" Silence. The truth, stark and irrefutable, had finally detonated in the room. All eyes fell on Helen. She seemed to shrink, the imperious matriarch collapsing into a trembling, exposed woman. Her justifications came out in a ragged whisper, a confession not of guilt, but of a deeply twisted ideology. "You were always such a difficult child, Natalie," she breathed, her eyes wild. "So willful. I was just trying to be prepared for the baby, in case he was like you. It wasn't to hurt him. It was to keep him safe, to keep him from being difficult." The admission was more horrifying than I could have imagined. She saw my son not as a person, but as a potential repeat of her perceived failure me. The crib was a preemptive strike, a way to cage a spirit she feared she couldn't break. Amanda, seeing her mother's ship sinking, immediately tried to swim for shore. "I didn't know," she cried, turning to me with pleading eyes. "I thought it was just an expensive crib. I had no idea she did that. I would never," but the reversal was complete. Their power, built on a foundation of lies and manipulation, had been utterly demolished by the plane. Ugly truth. They were exposed, not just to me and Mark, but to an agent of the state, yo. They were no longer the concerned family. They were perpetrators. As I looked at their terrified, shattered faces, I felt no pity, only the cold, clean finality of a war that was finally, truly over. The air in our living room was thick with unspoken tension, a tactical stillness before an ambush. 3 days after her initial visit, Martha Dawes sat in an armchair in the corner. Beside her, looking grim and official, sat a man she had introduced only as Detective Miller. His presence was my idea, a non-negotiable condition for the family meeting I had arranged. My mother and sister were coming over, summoned under the pretense of clearing the air. They believed they were walking into the final act of my surrender, ready to graciously accept my apology and reassert their control over my fragile state. They had no idea they were walking into a reckoning. The doorbell rang, and my heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Mark squeezed my hand, a silent transfer of strength. Before he went to open it, Helen and Amanda swept in, their faces composed in masks of gentle, sorrowful concern. They'd even brought a peace offering, an absurdly large bouquet of white lilies, funereal and cloying. "Natalie, darling," Helen began, her voice a soft coo as she rushed toward me, arms outstretched for an embrace. I stood my ground, not moving an inch, and her arms fell awkwardly to her sides. Her eyes flickered for a moment toward the two strangers in the corner, a flicker of confusion she quickly masked. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice cool and even. "Please, sit down." They settled on the couch, their smiles tightening as they took in the silent, imposing figure of Detective Miller. "Nat, we were so worried," Amanda said, launching into her script despite the unsettling audience. "That phone call, you just didn't sound like yourself. We're not angry, we just want to help you get through this." This was it, the performance I had been anticipating my entire life. I let her words hang in the air. Then I looked directly at my mother. "I know about the anonymous call to child services, Mom. A call which is a criminal offense when made with malicious intent." Helen flinched, her gaze darting toward the detective. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her composure beginning to fray. "Why would anyone do such a thing?" "An anonymous family member," I clarified, my gaze unwavering. "Someone who claimed I was delusional, specifically, delusional about the crib you gave me." Amanda jumped in, her voice pitched with alarm. "Someone called child services on you." "Oh, Natalie, that's horrible. See, Mom, this is what we were worried about." "Let's talk about the crib," I said, cutting through her feigned panic. I nodded to Mark. He disappeared into the nursery and returned a moment later. With a resonant thud that made both women jump, he placed the heavy steel plate on the coffee table, right next to their funereal lilies. Then he uncoiled the leather straps, letting them fall across the metal. The color drained from Helen's face. Amanda stared at the objects as if they were venomous snakes, her mouth opening and closing silently. The air of condescending pity vanished, replaced by raw, cornered panic. "We know what this is," Mark said, his voice dangerously low. "The question is, why did you put it there?" Helen sputtered, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into dust. It's a mistake. The manufacturer, they must have sent the wrong one, a defective model. We had no idea, I swear." "A defect?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "A defect that includes custom-made leather restraints? A defect that just happens to align perfectly with your lifelong belief that I am incapable and need to be controlled?" "This is insane," Amanda cried. "You're turning us into monsters. You turned yourselves into monsters when you filed a false report and conspired to unlawfully restrain my child." I shot back, my voice ringing with clarity. That was the cue. Detective Miller stood up, his presence instantly dominating the room. "Ma'am," he said, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority as he addressed Helen. "We have a warrant for your cell phone records. Filing a false report with a state agency is a serious crime, but frankly, that's the least of your worries right now." He gestured to the hardware on the table. "This, however, looks a lot like conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment." The legal terms, cold and sharp, hung in the air. Amanda let out a small, strangled gasp. "Furthermore," Detective Miller continued, "Ms. Dawes and I also spoke with the European boutique that created this device. The owner provided us with the original invoice, the custom specifications you emailed him, Helen, and a wire transfer confirmation from an account in your name." He paused, letting the weight of the evidence crush them. He also forwarded the email chain with your daughter, Amanda, who followed up on the shipping status and confirmed the delivery address. He thought you were both so admirably thorough. The final betrayal. Amanda wasn't just a bystander, she was an active accomplice. She whipped her head toward her mother, her face a mask of disbelief and horror, not at the act itself, but at being caught. "I didn't know," she shrieked, scrambling away from her mother on the couch. "She told me it was for security, like against burglars. She lied to me. Tell them, Mother. Tell them you lied." But Helen was gone. The imperious matriarch had been replaced by a pale, trembling woman staring at a future of court dates, public humiliation, and criminal charges. Her confession came out in a ragged whisper, a pathetic attempt at justification. "You were always so difficult. Natalie," she breathed, her eyes wild. "So willful. I was just trying to be prepared. For the baby, in case he was like you, it wasn't to hurt him, it was to keep him safe." "Safe? From what? From having a personality?" I asked. The question sharp as glass. Detective Miller stepped forward. "Helen Brooks, Amanda Brooks, you need to come with me. You have the right to remain silent." The sound of the Miranda rights being read in my own living room was surreal. They were being let out not as disgraced family members, but as criminal suspects, as they were escorted to the door. Amanda collapsed into hysterical sobs, still babbling about how she was tricked. Helen just looked at me, her eyes filled not with remorse, but with a final, venomous glare of pure hatred. The mask was gone, the monster was fully revealed, and it was finally being caged. The front door clicked shut, leaving behind a silence that was profound and absolute. The ordinary sounds of my home, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle gurgle of the baby monitor, rushed in to fill the void left by the chaos. Mark wrapped his arms around me, and I sagged against him, the adrenaline that had held me upright for days finally draining away, leaving me weak-kneed and trembling. We stood there for a long time, watching through the window as 2 police cars pulled away from our curb, their presence a shocking, suburban anomaly that broadcasted the ugly truth to the entire neighborhood. The nightmare was over, but the fallout was just beginning. The legal proceedings were a brutal, drawn-out affair. Helen, facing the more serious charges, mortgaged her home to hire a team of high-powered lawyers who tried every trick in the book. They attempted to paint me as a vindictive, unstable daughter, a narrative that withered under the weight of the evidence, the crib itself, the damning emails, and the calm, factual testimony of Miss Dawes and the European craftsman who flew in to testify. Amanda, in a desperate act of self-preservation, turned on our mother completely. She took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Helen in exchange for lesser charges. Her testimony was a pathetic spectacle of tears and self-pity, painting herself as a pawn, a dutiful daughter manipulated by a monstrous matriarch. It was a cowardly performance, but it worked. In the end, Amanda was convicted of filing a false police report and perjury. She received 2 years of probation, a hefty fine, and court-mandated therapy. She left the state the day after her sentencing, a disgraced exile. I received a single, rambling letter from her a month later, full of blame and excuses, with no hint of genuine remorse. I burned it without a reply. Helen's fate was far more severe. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit unlawful imprisonment and child endangerment. The judge, a stern woman who had watched the proceedings with visible disgust, made an example of her. In her sentencing statement, she spoke of a monumental abuse of parental trust and a premeditated psychological cruelty that chills the soul. Helen Brooks, the queen of her manicured social circle, was sentenced to 5 years in a state penitentiary. The news sent shockwaves through the community, a salacious story of high society darkness laid bare. There was no grief this time. There was no phantom limb ache for a family I never had. Their crimes had cauterized that wound completely. Seeing my mother's photograph on the evening news, stripped of her glamour and pride, didn't bring me pain or satisfaction. It brought me nothing at all. She was a stranger, a cautionary tale, a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. The years that followed were quiet and healing. We sold our house, the scene of the final confrontation, and moved to a small town by the sea, a place with no memories. Mark's architecture firm flourished. Leo grew from a baby into a bright, funny, fiercely independent little boy with his father's easy smile and my stubborn spirit. He learned to ride a bike, scraped his knees, and built magnificent sandcastles that the tide washed away. His world was one of boundless freedom and security, a security built not from steel plates and leather straps, but from unwavering love. We never told him the details of the story. There was no need. The absence of his grandmother and aunt was simply a fact of his life, like the color of the sky. Our family was small, solid, and complete. One evening, when Leo was about 6, we were looking through old photo albums. He pointed to a picture of a younger me, standing awkwardly beside a smiling Amanda. "Who's that?" he asked. I looked at Mark, and he gave me a small, supportive nod. "That was my sister." I said simply. "Where is she, so?" he asked, his curiosity pure. I paused, searching for the right words, the simple truth. "Sometimes," I began, choosing my words carefully, "people make choices that hurt other people very badly. And when they do that, they can't be in our lives anymore. It's not because we don't love them, but because we have to love ourselves more. We have to keep our family safe." He accepted this with the straightforward logic of a child, nodded, and turned the page. And that was it. The legacy of pain had been distilled into a simple lesson about safety and boundaries. The cycle was broken, the curse was lifted. Looking out at the ocean that night, with Leo sleeping soundly in his bed and Mark's hand in mine, I felt a profound sense of peace. My mother and sister hadn't just given me a crib, they had given me a crucible. Like I had been tested by fire, and I had emerged not scarred, but forged. I had learned the true meaning of strength, the fierce, unyielding power of a mother's love, and the liberating finality of choosing freedom. And in the quiet rhythm of the waves, I knew that we were finally, and forever, safe